And this meeting is being recorded. This is the meeting of the Concord Middle School Building Committee on June 24th. Okay. And I believe our first order of business, since I don't have any printer here, I'm going to have to pull it up on my screen, but I believe it's approving the minutes. Kristen, do you know which minutes we're approving? Can you help me out here?
Yep, so the May 20th was still open, and then the June 3rd minutes.
So does anyone have any additions or questions about the May 20th minutes?
Were the mid-20th minutes reissued, or? I saw the June 3rd minutes, but I
when I wrap that up, okay.
I mean the June 6th minutes, but I didn't see the May 20th. Or maybe I just missed them.
I thought the May 20th ones were approved as amended. So if
why would they be coming back to us?
Okay. So Kristen, do you have any insight into that?
No, I think we should, again, just hold those back, and then the June 6th move forward with those and make sure that the May 20th amended goes up.
Okay, let's do that. So June 6th. Are there any comments or questions for the June 6th?
By the way, did you call roll? I guess you did, huh?
Oh, no, I certainly did not. I checked people off as they came in, but I will call roll. Thank you very much. Stephen Crane, not here. Jared Stanton.
Present.
Lori Hunter.
Present.
Thank you. Justin Cameron.
He is not coming.
Okay. All right. Ms. Harris?
Here.
No. John Harris? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that's me, I'm here.
Okay. And Russ Hughes, I'm sorry.
Here.
And Kate Hamley is no longer with us. Matt Johnson?
Present.
Peter Fishalis?
Present.
Court Booth?
Present.
Heather Bout? Don't think Heather is going to make it today. Frank Cannon? I see you, Frank. Chris Popov?
Present.
Charlie Parker?
Here.
Matt Root?
Present.
Pat Nelson, I am present, and Dawn Gorelio is not present today. Dawn has had a death in her family and will not be able to attend today, so I am attempting to chair. So we'll go back to the June 3rd minutes. Do we have any corrections or changes?
I move that we approve the June 6th, 2021 minutes as written.
I second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? I'll call roll. Jared Stanton?
Yes.
Lori Hunter?
Yes.
John Harris?
Yes.
Russ Hughes?
I'll abstain. I wasn't present.
Okay. Matt Root?
Yes.
Peter Fishalis?
Yes.
Court Booth?
Yes.
Frank Cannon? No, I can't see you, Frank, so you're going to need to say yes. Frank, you want to just, now I can see you. Want to just wave your hand if you're good with these minutes? Thank you, Frank. Chris Popov?
Yes.
Charlie Parker?
Yes.
Matt Johnson?
Yep.
Pat Nelson, yes. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have approved the minutes. Kristen, can you pull up the agenda? I cannot seem to get it on my screen.
I mean, next is just correspondence, and then we move into Kristen.
Okay. So Heather did not receive any correspondence. I would like to report that I sent some correspondence and got correspondence back from the select board regarding wanting to retain our communications communications chair for this committee. Heather Bout is going off the school committee, and so when we lose Heather, and we've now lost Kate Hanley because she has moved on to another position, and we wish her well. But Heather has been doing an amazing job of keeping our communications operations going. So I requested that the select board consider appointing her as a citizen representative to this committee. The response I got back was that that would only be possible if we could possibly designate one of our existing citizen members as someone who has construction experience. So I'll be pursuing that to see how we can make that happen. And I'll also ask the school committee if there's any possibility of keeping Heather on, as designating Heather as a continuing member of this committee.
You mean by asking the school committee to do that?
Yeah, Terry Ackerman suggested to me that we could ask the school committee to designate Heather. It doesn't need to be a school committee member. It can be someone designated by the school committee, is my understanding.
Oh, yeah, I can speak to that if you want me to, Pat. The school committee will look at all of its liaison appointments later in July, and probably arrange the entire slate at one time. We know we have the prerogative to name a person who has stepped off the committee as our continuing member, but there's been no decision. That'll all be done in public session.
Okay.
Though, wouldn't it be the case that until you appoint somebody else, Heather is your appointed representative?
Yes, and that's known to us. In fact, we spoke explicitly to that at the last meeting.
Okay, so Heather's good until July, and we've got some time to sort of figure this out. If we can't figure it out, we will need another communications chair.
There is one more piece which I think everybody will remember, and I don't know if this will be a factor, but I think we remember that Heather was particularly articulate on the subject of the value of a non-member who could handle some of the advocacy work that no committee member could handle. So I don't know if indeed that's something that, Pat, you want to discuss with Heather.
Right, and I think that we can figure out how we get this on our agenda to think about that. I have some feelings about not having having a co-chair of the committee not be on the committee. And I need to look into whether or not that's appropriate and desirable, but I don't think we want to discuss that now because we're just in correspondence. But we can discuss that for future business. All right, Matt, well then keep taking me through that agenda because I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, so now it's the schematic design presentation.
Okay. All right, Kristen.
Great.
Thank you.
So I am going to just lead off by updating you all that we did have a couple meetings to work on refinements to the gym dimensioning and all of the cross-court dimensioning and all of that. I'm still working on a memo that captures all of that as well as the updated space summary. So I'll make sure to issue that before our next meeting. For now, you and Cole, our design partners and the architecture team have been working off of where we left off with kind of a blend of what we heard from CCYB, the athletics director for the school, and also in a meeting with Charlie Parker. So they're working with that. And so we'll make sure to discuss that more at our next meeting. But I do want to hand the floor over to you and Cole. Most of the presentation is about their, is related to the presentation that you received, and that is all of their material. I will say that the other document you received was the educational programming takeaways. And I hope that you all had a chance to kind of glance through it. That is kind of a summary of the work that our educational planner, Phil Poinelli, was doing through all of the interviews and follow-up meetings with the teachers and staff. And so that's a summary document of those interviews. And that document informs some of the changes you'll be seeing in the floor plan. So I just felt like it would make more sense for you and Cole to be presenting the updated floor plan and speaking to those points rather than us just reading through the bullets. But if there are any questions as we go through the plans related to the takeaways or anything like that, we can certainly jump into those.
Are you going to go separately through those other documents, or are those just for reference purposes?
They're just for reference. You'll be receiving all the minutes from our meetings and everything. So, you know, we wouldn't be walking through all of the minutes of all the meetings that we have. So it's really just to help you have the background, and everything that's presented to you will have been informed by that. So you'll really be seeing the product of those minutes.
I thought that they were very clear and helpful. I really thought that they were concise as well. It was very, very nice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So again, our Ewing Cole partners will take over the design presentation, and they'll be speaking to any of those critical points where future decision making will occur and things like that.
Thank you, Kristen. Bill, can you share the presentation? So we're glad to be back in front of you again this morning. As Kristen mentioned, we have been keeping pace with the discussions relative to program refinement. You can go to the next one, Bill. And so today we do want to just to repeat what Kristen has said. We're not going to go in depth into that document. Everybody has it. It's been distributed. Hill has commented upon it. We've discussed that with Lori and Justin, and the work that we will show you today recognizes the salient points of that programming summary. It's, you know, can you go back? That would be essentially highlight the gym, the auditorium, a couple other issues, co-location of certain administrative guidance, nurse things, but Bill will show you the impact of that as we get there. Much of our discussion today will be about visioning, and we'll leave some time for discussion. I just want to highlight, you can go to the next one, Bill, some key documents. We don't have to spend time on these this morning, but it is important. Our work is continually informed by these summary statements that have been developed. So, you know, project goals here, we can go to the next one. Your kind of the unique pedagogical and curricular approach and vision, this is at the forefront. So as we distribute these, again, each time we present, we don't have to spend time on this, but we believe it's a helpful reminder to keep the goals in front of us. This is just a kind of summary of what's important. This has been, you know, presented, refined, codified. So we keep this at the front, and then finally some specific design goals on the next slide.
Two slides back, there is this note that the auditorium for the whole school, which seems inconsistent with the goals that has been set.
Bill, I think he's talking one slide back.
I thought it was on this, the next one with the, sorry to try to find the exact space for it. Shoot. No, it was the previous one with the small print. It was in the small print. An auditorium and cafeteria that can hold the entire school.
These are the visions that were given to us.
Yeah,
they're from pre-study.
But actually, that's
just
a
to keep,
fair point. We might want to adjust that. You know, as we build the documentation for the school, we can adjust that. Matt, thank you very much for making that observation, and we can make that adjustment.
Are we going to be able to make comments during the presentation? Is that okay? I have one on the slide that you just presented.
I'll defer to Kristen as to how she would. I mean, I don't, Kristen. We're happy to take questions. We can run it all the way through. However you want to do this.
Yeah. So we're currently scheduled to go until 9:30. So I think that the key would be if you fold in Q&A, we just want to make sure to wrap up by 9:15. So in about an hour. So so however it works to. Go through all of that with Q&A so that we leave time for new business and comment.
Well, let me just leave a placeholder then. We don't need to discuss this now, but it is something that I raised with Dawn, and I did say that I wanted to raise it at the meeting. We talk about a range of 80 to 103 million. And at the same time, you're talking about goals. And we have discussed a goal of 100 million. And I think that's been discussed extensively by 3 other town committees, including the selectmen. And I think that we ought to, as we create our image for the public and as we move forward through schematic design, I think the goal that we've agreed to pursue is 100 million. And that's a very important number, I think, to everyone. It was discussed at length a few times. And I think that it's okay to say we have a range in terms of you know, some numbers that have been run to show where we have a potential problem, but I think that our goal remains 100 million. So don't need to discuss that now, but I think we are going to need to come back to it.
Yeah, we can definitely parking lot that, because I think, again, we're only going to be getting to our costs at the end of schematic design. I see Lori has her hand up. I don't know if you want to say something briefly on that. Otherwise, I think we should make sure that you and Cole, maybe you can get through the floor plan, and then we can take questions on the floor plan, and then through the visioning, and then you can take questions on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to wait. I'm happy to wait on that.
Great.
Bill, let's move to the next slide, please.
Could I just add before, I just want to offer a correction. The visioning slide in 2018, prior to the work of this committee. So maybe that just needs to be noted. I would hate to undo that committee's work without them being available. That was some overlap of membership, but not completely. So maybe we can just note that going forward. Originally, the vision was an auditorium for the whole school.
Okay.
You have seen previous iterations of this diagram. We have simply updated it to reflect the last few tweaks. So this is illustration of the nominally 98,000 net square feet and the 147,000 gross square feet. Our work since the last time we've been with you has been to incorporate the feedback of Phil Poinelli's kind of detailed programming work. It's been about right sizing of the program elements, tightening up of the building envelope to reconcile to the 147,000 square feet, and also to be increasingly conscious of the integration of building systems, right? This is about aligning, cleaning up some of the elements, looking forward to the integration of a structural frame and the incorporation of appropriate mechanical systems and some of that. So that is not primarily what we're talking about today, but those kinds of things are going on in the background. So Bill and Saul will talk about how this most recent discussion of programming refinements, and preferred programming adjacencies have informed our organizational diagram and the floor plan going forward. Saul, you may be on mute. I don't know. I can't. You go.
I hear you.
Yep.
All right.
Here. Sorry about that. So some of the most important relationship of the building its relationship to the site. I think that over time, and we have a visioning session, but over time, most buildings get dated in the sense that something changes, the style changes, and buildings really remain relevant in relationship to always remain relevant in relationship to the landscape. And that becomes really important in a site like this. What we were able to accomplish is really kind of pretty nice in the sense, first of all, the building is a right soil orientation, completely parallel to the south and north. But then it occupies the edge of the plateau, and because it has to allow for all the other functions. Bill, if you can point to some of those, the field, the parking, all to happen on a site that's really pretty tight because mostly it's wooded and on a slope. One of the nice things here is where we're able to locate a position where the building 3-story volume is actually slightly sunken and is connected through a lobby to the public amenities and the shared public programs. One of the nice things also, because of the site configurations, we're able to really minimize the circulation within the site, the parking and all of that. Cars come in, drop off and then leave, and the same thing with the buses. And one of the nice opportunities here is to begin to connect the building to the landscape itself. I mean, we can talk about green buildings a lot, but if we fail that mission, if we fail the mission of actually connecting the students and the next generation to the landscape and to the world, I think that it's only a partial success. We can be net zero, but if our students don't feel that relationship to the world around them, you know, we, as an educational building, we fail somewhat. So one of the nice things about the building is it's located over a ravine, and the landscape, the wooded landscape, kind of scapes under the building and begins to be a wetland or another line of vegetation that connects all the way to the street. So when people come into the building, they actually walk through a remade natural landscape and then discover the woods beyond, as you can see here in the middle image in the center of the stack. And as I mentioned, that the lower building of the classroom is actually nestled in the landscape, and you can see how that works on the top image. If a bird flying in the woods, you'd actually be able to see the bottom image on the left side. So that relationship, it begins to kind of translate into a very efficient internal relationship. If you, Bill, can you move to the next slide, please? So the building, and we added a couple of slides. The building is really based on one of the most efficient possible sort of configuration. It's based on a double loaded corridor, and people are reluctant to use double loaded corridors because they are a corridor. For instance, the federal government requires that the new DODEA buildings, Department of Defense Education building, actually do not have or minimize corridors. So the buildings that they're generating have a series of pods. But the reason we're able to execute a double loaded corridor here is because it's really not a corridor, it's a spine with a series of these events that allow it to breathe and open up on occasions. So the first set on the right side would be the team commons, right? And we've talked about those extensively. They allow us to sort of execute the mission of the program in terms of collaboration. And the blue words are actually words from your vision and goals, if you can see those. So the team commons allow teachers to collaborate. Two teachers can join forces and allow for a certain group of students to kind of work outside. It gives choice to the students whether they want to be inside or outside. And spatially, it also allows the corridors to breathe, right? They don't have daylight coming there, but spatially they're allowed to breathe. The next point of the corridor is what we're calling the lobby, and it's a joint between the educational wing and the shared spaces wing. And what's important about this, it's really a collector in many ways. When you have hundreds of kids streaming into the building, all educational buildings have a larger vessel to kind of collect them. But here we're not just collecting, we're also distributing in the sense that they are being, Bill, if you can point to the elevator core. So the students have to go from the venue to the core, and we're talking about hundreds of them in the morning. So that collector area right in the front of the vestibule is absolutely critical. What's nice about this collector area, unlike most other lobbies in schools or large collection zones, is that it's actually a place that can provide identity and choice, and it begins to connect students to their environment in the sense that they come in and they enter, and that lobby represents the woods beyond. So it's a wonderful experience. You're coming in from the plateau, and the first thing you see is the trees and the gully, and it begins to create also a place where students can actually have a relief from the corridor spaces if they want to sit and talk, a place for meeting. It offers all these functions that are absolutely critical to the mission of the school. If we didn't have it there, if we didn't have that and we butted those things, we would still have to create that zone that collects all these people and redistributes them to the program, to the academic and educational program on the right side. After that, again, the corridor shrinks again, and it just opens up slightly in a couple of places where we actually have, again, a large volume of people streaming in right in front of the cafeteria, and in the areas where you have the auditorium and the gym, because if you have a large public functions, again, you're going to need some kind of breathing space there for breakouts and just meeting people. So this whole idea of a very efficient double loaded corridor, that breathing, contracting and opening becomes critical to this notion of well-being here. Whenever we can, we bring in daylight, which is absolutely critical to the experience of the student and to the simple idea of joy. I remember that we had the word joy, the mission here. So this begins to speak to the configuration of the building, how it sits on the site, and how it begins to distribute the program along this spot. Bill,
one other aspect of this is the vertical distribution. In other words, getting kids up and down to other floors, and it would seem to potentially make or break this space. Do you have ideas about how you're going to do that there?
Sure. I think what happens is that the largest volume of people is going to be really necessary right across from the vestibule. But however, as you can see here, you'll see in the plan, in the more specific plan, this is still what we believe it's still wide enough to allow for people to pass through and or go to the stair and go to the elevator. So we're comfortable with the dimensions here. We've kind of looked at that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Where is the stair and the elevator?
Right here.
Right in there, yeah.
Yeah.
So the red elements are actually stairs and elevators, and what the blue elements are what we call pressure points, where you have large volumes of people sort of streaming through, and obviously the entrance vestibule on the top is one the entrance to the library is a lesser one. The cafeteria is going to be a pressure point, and certainly the auditorium and the gym, not just during the school day, but in the evenings when you have community events and other functions.
And Saul, just since you mentioned it, I'd love to see kind of focus on higher use of the stairs and less use of the elevator.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we have one stair here in the lobby that connects to the upper level, and that's an open stair. We can make the fire egress stair as welcoming as possible. We bring daylight into it. It's not going to look like something you don't want to be in. It's also important to bring daylight for security and other reasons. We can obviously emphasize that in order to, I mean, naturally, when you have so many kids, they're going to take the stair. They're not going to wait for the elevator.
We only allow kids on elevators with permission ahead of time in specific circumstances. So
great, thank you, Lori.
There you go. You just legislate the approach.
Exactly, Saul.
Right, but still, I think you use the operative word there, Saul, as welcoming as possible.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, and we completely agree. Any other questions here?
Can you talk a little bit about the team common areas there in the academic part of the building?
Sure. Actually, Keith, do you want to also talk about that, or?
Yeah, you know, Lori actually may be best to deal with it, but this is central to the teaming organization within each of the grades. So we've developed this kind of team unit that has a series of classrooms and a kind of a collaboration space for the students. As we move through the plan, we could actually, Bill, you might want to just go to the next diagram. This is kind of a building block of the entire approach, and it's tailored to the educational plan. And there's one team commons per team, and then they're also knit together through their relationship across the corridor. But I would defer to Lori to describe how she may intend to use that.
Sure, happy to. Part of what we're envisioning here is as pedagogy continues to shift towards collaboration and cooperative work and presentations and different ways of showing knowledge, we're going to want kids to be able to spread out. In buildings that I've been in other districts and some of the ones we visited, kids are spread out in those team areas as they're working in those groups and rehearsing and working on their projects. We've also used them as presentation spaces. It's also probably worth noting that when we reduced the square footage of the classroom sizes, we were counting on having that overflow because we are at a fairly low square footage number. So that those evolve into this really, really productive, lively, engaging learning space. And I'm looking forward to what that will bring.
I guess what concern I have on these spaces along a corridor is those at the end of the corridor are less likely to have distractions. Those that are at the beginning of a corridor, they're likely to have a fair amount of traffic and potential disruption as people are trying to do stuff.
I mean I agree in the sense that that's one of the issues that you would have with a corridor like this. But I think we can treat that architecturally, because even though we're showing this completely open, there will be an architectural element that will have partial closure there from the corridor. So there will be some screening. I think we can handle that. And we've handled that in the past in different ways, whether it's glass or some kind of a screen or a half wall with some kind of a partition above, or some flexible partition. So there's many ways of handling it. But unfortunately, that's one of the sort of issues that you'd have with the efficiency of that kind of corridor.
Yeah, I'm not very worried about that. I've seen, you know, traffic has to go through these areas in other buildings I've been in, and it just becomes the norm, and kids stay focused on when they're engaged. It's not a problem. They can stay focused on what they're doing, and it actually brings some of the energy and movement to the space.
Yeah, and I think it creates the opportunity to build the identity as a grade between the three commons.
And then there's the movable walls concept, and I think there was discussion about concern about them getting on a value engineering list, and that we needed to prioritize in order to ensure that those that really matter, could get into the design. And I'm just looking at these and trying to understand, where is it critical to the educational process, and where is it just a convenience?
So Matt, I think that at that point, that was one of the most kind of highlighted and critical aspects of this programming summary and some of the feedback. So I think that as we move through a detailed advancement of this, we could explore which would be the most highly valued. We can illustrate some options to Lori and her team and to this committee. So it may be that the most productive way is to put them between two classrooms. If you go back, Bill, and join two classrooms into one, that would be one opportunity. The other option is that you could make them allow the classrooms open into the team commons. There are configurations that allow both of those to happen, but again, it costs, each of those moves is a value driven decision. So we can look at what would be most effective and to the teaching model.
Is there any one that allows the front wall of the classroom to move forward and encompass the team commons and create a private space for that cluster?
That could be a consideration that we could put forward and talk to Lori and Justin about how effectively that would support their pedagogy.
And I will add regarding the sorry.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
Regarding the team commons, the students are either in class or not in class, typically. So they're not actually, there shouldn't be very much disturbance of anyone passing in front of the classrooms, because there'll be the transition time between classes, then they'll be in the class and using the team commons, and not doing any major circulation down the hallway until class rotates again.
Well, there's that space at the end of the hall there, for example, right? People going and coming from that, I assume.
Okay, so I've got maybe somebody's going to respond to you, Matt. I don't want to interrupt your shot here at getting an answer, but I want to understand what the structural implications are and whether that's been thought through of increasing the amount of wall structure that is movable from load-bearing walls. Are there major implications to the structure of the building by increasing these movable, the number of movable partitions?
There's a modest structural element to it, but it's not significant.
Okay, good.
And we do have, we haven't even discussed the width of those openings yet. They can be wide, they can be narrower, medium. So that'll all play a role. See Pat's hand up?
Yeah, I have a hand up. If I'm remembering correctly, and it is now a very long time ago that we visited the school at Hanscom and some of the other schools that have these kinds of setups. And it might be worth it to sort of revisit sort of what we heard from those educators as to how they work. My impression was that they work quite well and were an enhancement rather than a distraction. But to Matt's question, it might be worth to just kind of go back and revisit some of that.
Yeah. So Pat, I do think that could be a helpful recollection to the team. I will tell you this, that the project that we went to visit at Hanscom was a primary and middle school that was constructed in 2 phases. When the first phase was constructed, there was some hesitancy on the part of their education team. They thought maybe this would be a distraction. And so they were a little more reserved in their integration of the operable partitions. As they, after they were in the building for several years prior to the construction of the primary school, they found that they could be very productive to the learning environment. When they built the second phase, which is the primary school, we integrated more of the operable partitions, and now they find themselves leaving them open most of the time, in fact. And so they had some initial hesitancy to them. Once they occupied the space, they realized the value, they integrated more, and now they tend toward a quite open environment. And in that school, to Matt's point in question, they have both of those conditions that we discussed. They have a solid operable partition between classrooms, right? So when you close it, it has marker boards and other presentation surfaces. And then they have a glazed operable partition that opens to the commons. And so it gives them really ultimate flexibility, but they use them in an open format pretty regularly.
Great. And so in the interest of time, I want to keep moving. But if there, we'll come back to floor plan questions if there are any at the end. Otherwise, what I'd like to do is, since we are evolving the schematic design over the course of the next 4 months, please do just submit the questions to the co-chairs, Ian and I, and we will make sure to absorb answers into the next presentation. And get you materials on that. And it sounds like there's a lot of question around team common use and operable partitions. So we'll make sure to address those in the next meeting.
Yeah, so taking a step back, we thought it was important to present sort of where we were and where we are now with the incorporating the program adjustments as we close out the feasibility phase, the larger gym and auditorium, and some space efficiencies. And also hearing some feedback from the educators, how the school will function. We made some changes. So big picture, there's been the obvious adjustments of the auditorium and gym size. We've shifted them to make them more integral to the school experience instead of being kind of outboard. And that has some implications in the massing that we think will work out nicely, which Saul can speak to later. We've hearing feedback from the educators. Again, we reconfigured the administration and guidance and brought in the nurse to kind of make this a collaborative environment of guidance and nurse, and to best benefit the students as a wellness component. Moving from the lobby into the education bar, you can see the team commons unfold. We've repositioned where the grade level resource room is into this space, which helps simplify the massing. In doing that, we've also shortened this wing and cleaned up some of the geometry too, again, with that goal and direction from the feasibility to simplify the massing and design of the school. You can see the cafeteria and media center are by and large in the same spot, which all look out over into the wooded space and provide a really great opportunity. With the efficiency from removing the alternate PE space, we've decided to move the OT-PT room near the gym to provide that as a flexible space and serve almost double duty there. This is the upper and lower floor, which the classroom wing stacks on top of each other for the most part, with the vocational, the engineering, and the family consumer science taking this spot here. There's teacher planning and the assistant principal offices in this the color here. And the world language gets its own space that's essentially on top of the media center. The art rooms are located on the upper floor and have the opportunity to spill out into the corridor, into the lobby, and potential for access on this roof to provide immediate outdoor space. If not, they're very close to the entry to get out into the landscape.
I just wanted to mention one thing on the upper floor. It appears that on the tree facing side, back behind where the auditorium and gym are, there's an opportunity for additional space in that area that that hasn't been used. And I keep hearing the upper floor referred to as aspirational. So I just wonder, should we try to maximize the uses of opportunities for space up there, where people apparently will want to go, and it does seem like there's roof line up there that's just not being utilized, on that bottom left corner, if you will.
If I may start, I think that what we need to keep in mind is the PV panel area too. So we'll be starting to work with the PV consultants and making sure that we have a good amount of PV panel coverage on the roof versus the parking area, and start to fold that in. Having an occupied roof area is more costly than a ground level classroom area, and we know that the building committee has a lot of concerns with cost. So we're just making sure to evaluate and weigh the area we need to reserve for PV as well as the project cost.
Also, PV in the parking area is a lot more expensive than PV on the roof. So you get really some serious economizing by maximizing your rooftop.
Yeah, and I think we can dig into that as we have some slides that show the massing. Underneath here will be the kitchen and the loading dock, and that's inevitably higher. So we'll have to work out how we would use program above that. So
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And Bill, to your point, that'll also be then competing with rooftop equipment potentially.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going. So it's the floor plan just a little more developed in the diagrams we just saw. So we can go over this briefly. I can call out specific classrooms. So starting at the main entry, you come into the lobby, and we're going to turn right and come. This stretch of corridor is the media center, the dining commons or cafeteria, and also access to this shared space for the nurse and the guidance counselors. And then administration comes in off of that vestibule. We're still working through it with the educators, and I don't think they've seen this iteration. So this will change the specifics of which offices. The auditorium is central in the plan with the music just to the north of it, providing potential for interaction between that. And then chorus will be moved on stage. So lots of flexibility between how this works. This is currently showing an option where the stage portion, portion closest to the stage is sloped such that it's more of a traditional auditorium. And then the back of the auditorium is almost like a black box theater. It has a potential, it could be fixed traditional seating, or it could be a kind of retractable setup that allows almost a flexible space. So you can envision a dance class or many different functions in there. This is the gym, which is sized to the most recent conversation with the educators, and we have a detail slide of that as well. Locker rooms and storage to the north, and that OT-PT room. This is loading and mechanical area, kitchen. Coming back across to the educational wing, this color is the special ed classrooms. We have the toilet room located centrally, the resource room also located centrally. And here you can see that team structure a little more specifically. So this consists of your English, social studies, math, and science, all which share a shared commons, and then breakout rooms on either side. Going up a floor, this is the music with their shared, this is showing a shared room for the kiln and storage.
Or that's art, Bill, not music. So
excuse me, art, yeah. And the world language classrooms. And then the
Could you stop there just for a second? On the art, we had a plea for that third classroom. I'm not suggesting that we would add it, but would there be flexibility to add another room if we were to find space that we could reallocate, or are we kind of beyond that point in terms of the layout?
I think I'll let Kristen speak to that as far as timing, but.
In other words, is it worth having the discussion or not?
I think that there's going to continue to be some tinkering with the plan, but the quantity of spaces and the size of spaces is firm at this point.
So then, okay, I get it. I'm okay with that answer.
The question I'd have on the art space is the access to the roof. It does sound like a really attractive opportunity. How practical really is it to offer that in terms of, code or the student population and so on?
It would be limited in size so that they could safely exit the roof and then get out of the building in the event of an emergency. But the Hanscom School, for instance, has occupied roofs, so it's not uncommon in schools.
Yeah, I guess the concern I have right now with the way that it's situated is, while it's rooftop space, northern facing, all those things are great, that really right now it would just look out onto the roof, and your view, your vista, the beginning of the vista for art purposes is a roof. So it's a little different, and then the parking lot beyond. So I don't know how much it may actually in reality fulfill that aspiration. It's a hard problem to solve. I mean, I think the layout of the building makes it hard to find something.
Yeah, we'll continue to study that. And I think what we definitely want to do is be developing a value engineering list while we go through this process. So I think that, any rooftop classroom development, we'd make sure to plan it, but also include it isolated so that you could see the cost of it. Really, is what we typically do. It's just helpful for those kind of elements to really make it clear what you're paying for and everything. So,
yeah.
But we'll study it in terms of alternative with code and PV use, and possibly there's also the opportunity to have a low kind of vegetation on roof. So that it's not looking over a white like a PVC roof or anything like that. So there's a lot of opportunity to make that a pleasant view.
One of the nice things about that area is that because of its exposure, it's probably going to be less worthwhile for PVs. If we think about it, the top of the drawing is north. And the rest of the building, the second floor will be shading that roof. So I think that if any area could be an opportunity for a roof garden, for a roof deck, that would be that area.
Yeah. Moving to the lower level, family consumer science. Again, the administration, the teacher breakout rooms and offices, and the teams as stacked up before. We just wanted to dig into, these are the dimensions that have been discussed with the PE teachers and just vetting out the runouts. I don't know if we need
to. And again, no, I think that the memo that I'm putting together will provide a lot more information and backup from those meetings so that you can get the full context around why each of those dimensions is proposed as it is shown here. So again, in the interest of time, I think we want to get into the visioning slides, and then we can follow up on this in the next meeting.
Okay, but there was in the notes, it was saying an 8-foot run out from those meetings. And so that's what confused me. Seeing a 10, it was 6, right? It was 8 at the end of the big court and 6 at the end of the other courts was, I thought, the notes that I read from the meetings. And then I'm looking at this plan, I'm seeing 10 and 8. So I'm still a little confused.
Yeah, and so what I'm working on will bracket out what CCYB had noted and what other letters have noted, because we have gotten so much evolution of information, quite frankly. So we'll hope to spell that out very clearly in our document.
But this is still the diagram that you're going to explain, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's a preview of the dimensions, but without all of the rationale and discussion behind it. Back up.
So once we get the email, we'll have a discussion at that point.
Yes.
Okay.
So this, we've seen a similar diagram, just stacking it up. So this lower level is recessed below ground floor, which is the entry. So the main entry comes in here off of the bus drop off in that central lobby.
Bill, I have a kind of an odd question. I didn't know when to ask it, but are we going to need to get fire trucks in behind the building? Is there going to need to be essentially an access road that runs around the back of the building all the way from, you know, where the gym is located all the way around to the far end of the teaming areas?
Yeah, so we've already engaged in discussions with the fire department, and they are comfortable that they can safely respond to a fire from the north side of the building. So we're working with Mike, the landscape architect and civil, to ensure that there's adequate access for a bus or a fire truck rather on the north side, and that they can get down and walk around the building to the south.
Good.
Saul, I don't know if you want to.
Sure. So sure. So it's interesting that the massing has sort of evolved very nicely. One of our bigger concerns initially was having the auditorium and the gym forward with very high, high walls and with little opportunity or need for daylight. So we were very concerned about that whole idea. And what we were able to do with this new plan, and really Bill worked that out really nicely, is that we have a relatively low component for the building here, and allowing us to have almost like a storefront scale for these elements. And all of these elements would be the daylighting elements, right? So, the music rooms could have some daylight, and certainly the administration element would have daylight. So, and then we have the taller elements actually acting as a screen for the back. So what we can do, we can put all the equipment there and not require some kind of a screening device, hopefully, right? Depending on how tight the mechanical will be, but that's the plan. And one of the nice things about this component of the building is that because it's sunken a little bit, it's really a two-story volume. So it's a wonderful thing to have a building at a scale comfortable for the children, and deinstitutionalize this building in the sense that it doesn't have very large, intimidating elevations. And so, Bill, did you have any closing comments on this, or should I just take it from here?
I think you can take it unless someone wanted to. We're tight on time, but we did say we were going to take times to discuss the floor plans.
So so Kristen, should we just discuss the floor plans now and
well, I think that questions have been coming in as they go, so I would just press on.
Yes, Saul, I think you should go to the visioning.
Okay, so if we can just hold on to these two images. So, there are two faces to the building. There's the face that looks into the woodland, and then there's a face that looks into the public, and that begins to kind of also to distribute the sort of the effort in terms of the building, because the woods would screen the building, be extremely cost efficient there. Obviously allowing for the appropriate amount of daylight and all of that, but we can even use a more cost efficient material. And also the setback of the auditorium and the gym allow us to have a more cost efficient material on the top, while the street level or the ground level would be actually more sort of we can actually allow for a higher number for the treatment of the facade. So if we go to the next image, you already developed a series of sort of vocabularies. I would say masonry brick vocabulary with some glazing. The high school has more elaboration in terms of daylighting and solar protect, but it's essentially a modern approach to the use of brick. If you go to the next image. However, I think the most important thing to understand, and all of the images were selected in relationship to that, our budget right now is based on a brick facing of the vast majority of the building, and with 25% of the building with glazing, and the glazing is divided between curtain wall and punched windows. We absolutely. I'm sorry.
I think we just need Keith to mute because we're getting an echo.
So, sure. What we have to stick to these numbers, not just because of the cost model, but also because of the zero energy, net zero strategy here. So what we did here, we selected images that respond to that cost model in some way or another. The first image is kind of interesting. The first project is interesting. It's actually a nationally recognized school, and because of its sort of approach, you can see here some of the facades of the buildings are actually all masonry or concrete. This is in Oregon, while some other facades of the building are all glazing. It has to do with solar orientation and experience. They weren't shy. They didn't feel like they have to put a window everywhere just to kind of decorate the building, because the experience, if you can see sort of the model on the bottom left, experience is really about the landscape and its the building relationship to the slope, right? And next image. So the building is made out of these fingers that sort of connect the upper part of the school of the landscape to the lower part of the landscape, and the slope and the terraces are really what's really important here experientially. So the building uses windows very efficiently in between those areas, but not on the fronts of the building. However, still there are windows in critical locations. Next project, and I'm going to have to really go through this if you don't mind. The next project is a sort of the reason we wanted to include this is actually very subtle here. Not that we're going to have something this aggressively solid or this aggressively, I would say, inarticulate. But what's interesting here is that the brick, they have a brick exterior component and a metal exterior in the courtyard. But what's interesting here is that even that brick facade, by using color on the window frame, you can begin to activate that facade very subtly, right? And we wanted to show the entire gamut. This is a very cost-effective sort of exterior envelope. However, we do not have the budget for metal panel. We have to stick to masonry. Next image. Another building that has a relatively conservative use of brick, but again, begins to incorporate the landscape into the configuration and create the landscape as the primary interest. There is a curtain wall component that kind of overlooks the courtyard. Next image. And the thought here is that for you to comment about these images, so we can kind of diagnose where the group wants to go overall, the general approach. So when we come back to you with a couple of choices, the choices in terms of the design, the choices are kind of already somewhat calibrated to your vision, and we don't show up and people go, where did that come from? This building begins to do a lot more with the windows, right? First of all, the front of it, the entrance, is a more aggressive sort of use of material. It has a curtain wall with some screening, and it's possible that our lobby begins to take the curtain wall component there to kind of create a glazed open environment. However, it would be planned with a sort of with a net zero approach, right? Even though you have glazing, but that's probably going to be the area where you have the most extensive glazing. The rest of the building here on the left side is really interesting in the sense that the windows are syncopated. There's almost sort of this sort of random staccato to it, almost like a musical piece. And it's made with brick. Brick is variegated. There's a couple of colors within it, so there's a level of interest. However, in the inside of the courtyard, where it's less public, they began to use a CMU, right? These walls have CMU in them. And CMU is more cost effective, but it's a larger piece, but it's not a typical CMU that you see in places. It's a ground face CMU, so it almost looks like terrazzo. And we probably will consider doing something like that in the back of the building looking into the wood. Next image. This is again.
CMU is? What
I'm
does
sorry?
CMU mean? CMU?
It's essentially, it's a larger module of masonry that you see in a lot of buildings. It's 8 by 16 face.
The acronym is concrete masonry unit.
Okay, thank you. So it's just a bigger block.
It's a block, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
However, I mean, there's different CMUs. I'm not saying some of the CMUs that are associated with the 60s are, you know, the perforated ones and all of that. That's probably, we're not going to use that. It's a more of a smooth face CMU. This building begins to show us another approach to the exterior of the facade of punched windows. Instead of having a very sort of continuous brick with small punched openings, what's nice about this in a school would be the fact that kids actually, I mean, particularly the younger kids, and if they're on the sort of below a certain height, can still view directly into the landscape because the window is very low. It's not a strip window. And because the window is very high, you actually have daylight penetrating deeper into the building, right? So this vertical slot is very interesting in that sense. And we might be using that as an approach in the building itself. Also, with the sense of play, you actually can begin to create, again, a very sort of interesting facade with a relatively limited amount of glazing. And a couple of versions of this. And some of the images that I'm showing are not necessarily schools, but they're really about an approach for the exterior. If you take that last conversation, but make it simpler, you can see how that sort of staccato or like music piece, it's a bit musical in the way that these brick pieces syncopate. And then at certain moments on the right side, you actually have a larger brick module. Next image. We don't have exterior corridors, but again, the sort of the idea of how a vocabulary like that could begin to kind of generate an interest. And then that project actually has a topography as well. Something we could wind up with something very similar to the element to the picture on the right in the area where the lobby comes in. Next image. And another sort of image showing how that sort of staccato begins to interface with the landscape itself and the scale that it brings. Next image. This school is has a completely different approach. It's a little bit like your high school, but it has this L shape to it. It's a bit like your high school in the sense that the primary facade of the building in the top left image has a much more regular, and I would call it a punch window approach, where you have the larger frames in black, but then you have smaller windows in between. So it's a very specific rhythm that breaks down the scale of the building, not at a granular level, but almost at an elevation scale level. And then the entrance has a slight overhang and is clearly readable as the head of the configuration. Next image. Just a couple more images of how that could work. On the right side, the black metal panel element, and I want to emphasize that we don't have metal panel right now in the cost model. That would be the gym, and that's one of the reasons we push the gym inboard and put the lockers outside, because you can tell that element on the right, it really has a very large scale that would probably be a bit problematic in terms of the front of the building. Next image.
Hey, Saul, before you go into the internal stuff, I'd just like to ask a question about
the
net zero aspects of the external facing components that you showed us. I don't see any shading devices on the external sides of any of these walls. And I just would want to mention the fact that the MSBA recently had a conference, online conference, and they made the comment that the use of these shading devices, they look like fins, I guess you might call them, external shading devices, where necessary, are very effective in helping with overall HVAC performance. And I just wonder what your thought is on that, and is that something that you would potentially incorporate?
Absolutely, we would consider these shading devices. What helps us is that the entire front of the building is a northern exposure, which is perfect, right? You don't need any shading devices there. The back of the building, the southern exposure, would probably use horizontal shading devices.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I guess I would also mention that it's something Lori brought up about one of the other schools where they've had some difficulties with, excessive sun at certain points of the day. And I think that, given the experience in Massachusetts with this, it would be worth our while to, as you say, to scope that out.
Absolutely. And we went into that. The reason I didn't include, because they tend to be, I'm not so sure we have them in the budget. And I would like to build the design in such a way that we can either have them and then there'd be an improvement, or if we can't afford them, we can drop them off. And I say that reluctantly, knowing that we have to address some of these issues. For instance, some of the excessive sun can be handled through a frit, which is a ceramic layer on the glass, which cuts down some of that. So I didn't show any in the visioning because I didn't know if we could guarantee them in the cost.
Well, I really do think we need to look at this carefully. And MLK, I had some discussions with, the team in Cambridge, and they've been used extensively by either MLK or King Open, I forget which, or possibly both. And they even have solar panels on top of them. And they are effective net zero schools that are under 25 EUI operating. So
absolutely.
I think, we've got to keep our eye on the prize here. And I don't think we want to skimp on, this is something we want to really get under our belt. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, but I mean, again, I think our solar orientation is so fantastic that half the school doesn't need it because you're looking north, right? And our southern orientation is also pretty fantastic because you can protect for the shading through horizontal fins, which are far more effective, cost effective than vertical fins.
we want the, horizontal fence is what I had in mind. So
yeah. So yeah, of course we'll consider that. I think we have to kind of find the right place in terms of cost there, and the intention is to look at that.
So Saul and Charlie, I just want to interject one piece as well. In that southern elevation, we actually have the most effective and the least costly shading device built in because of the existing tree line that's along the southern elevation. We're going to get a ton of free shading, and it's really fantastic shading because it actually drops the leaves, it drops its shading during the winter months, right? And you actually get the heat gain during that season, which is when you really want it. And
well,
so
I don't, I'm not an expert, so I'm not recommending anything. I just think it needs to be modeled very carefully to determine, what we would get out of it.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And back to what you said, Matt, one of the goals is to minimize the tree damage to during construction. So we do have that sort of shading quality. But we will test all of that, and absolutely agree with you. We need, if we can incorporate, that would be fantastic. So the school, just to talk about the sort of some of the finishes of the school, we have essentially very cost-effective finishes. It's mostly we would be using color and paint to begin to kind of create an interest. The flooring is a VCT, and we would have carpet in some areas. All the ceilings would be acoustical. The idea is to, in the public spaces, to bring enough daylight to make the landscape really the primary interest here, right? So we'll be evolving that, and we'll have a separate moment visioning session for the interior. But here we just wanted to begin to touch on that. Next image.
I just think it's worth noting that in this that last example, that it was a 100,000 square foot school. It constructed in 2018 for $40 million.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just look at all the features of that school, it's really kind of surprisingly low budget.
Yeah.
Perhaps because it's Illinois.
It's a different market for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Next image. Again, the idea of keeping the interior very sort of elegant, simple, and count on daylight to be the activator. For instance, that image on the right, you have exposed ceiling in most of the space. You have, tile ceiling on the left, but you have VCT on the floor. But again, the landscape on the right and the left is really what's activating it. And you could see a space like that being in our lobby and or our cafeteria. Next image. This is a more intimate kind of school. What this building does is, again, the entryway or the public space has more glazing in the center, but as you go into the classroom, into the other wings on the right, you have punched windows, right? So, and there's a change of material that begins to kind of create separate blocks or certain volume in certain volumes. There's a stone on the lower volume, and then there's brick on the upper volume with a glass acknowledging the entryway. And the base of the building is that stone. Now, we don't have stone in our budget, but what we can do is materials that look like stone or a different color brick. Next image.
So it might be worth mentioning the solar shading here. That the canopy becomes the solar shading. And
that's correct. Yeah.
And I can see that. It looks good.
Yeah.
Next image. So this is a new building. It's for the it's a net zero building. It's the Adlinger Center for Energy and Environment at Princeton. Obviously, it's not a school, but Bill Chin and Todd Williams are very well-known architects that have sort of mastered the idea that you only introduce light at critical moments, and you don't show any spandrel glass because it's inefficient. And what they do is they don't shy away from the use of brick or solid. And if you can, and again, their work is often integrated with a landscape. So from the inside, you choreograph the views out, but from the outside also, you allow the vegetation to begin to sort of be the interesting element and begin to accentuate the wall itself. The other thing that they do is they use a particular kind of brick. The fabric of the brick itself is really quite wonderful. They use a more horizontal brick, and we could use that in the front of the building. So it's much more stacked, and they use a variegated and more textured brick, not a flat brick. So the light plays on the surfaces very beautifully. Next image. I'm sorry, I'm going through these. We have only 6 minutes, about 30 slides. So this is a very similar approach where the architect is not shying away from the solid with very small punched windows. No, we don't have a bell tower, but the image was useful for the fabric of the brick itself. What they've done here is they use multiple bricks, colors to create this kind of very careful striation that's not very distracting. It's not stripy, but it gives a second level of interest to the project when you look at the solid itself. Next image. So the next set of images is really beginning to talk about coloration, right? I mean, everybody thinks brick, immediately you go to red. But one of the things that make academic buildings or high school buildings or any of those pedagogical buildings look institutional is a combination of height and the use of the red brick, right? And the movement has been recently to kind of move away from that. And this school here is really interesting in the sense that it's all brick, right? Every color here is brick, but they're using white brick and glazed brick in certain locations to begin to create a level of interest and introduce chroma into the sort of the design. Let me be clear, the scope of images want to show the whole gamut, and it's not necessarily the solution. So here we test your sort of interest in this sort of approach. And it doesn't have to be this extreme, but we could certainly introduce color or bright color through glazed brick in some locations. And if you go to the previous image, what's interesting is that how long that school is, right? It's huge, but the introduction of this very aggressive color strategy along with the gray brick begins to break it down. Next image. Next project. Yeah, we can go to the next one. So this is a slightly different approach. It still talks about color, but the idea here is that within a very subtle variation, you can begin to create a sort of more modest way to kind of break down a surface. And here they're using, right, the way that they lay the brick and the type of brick, as well as very slight variegation of color to begin to introduce to break down the larger scale of the building. And then they used the frame metal to begin to kind of create those puncture conditions, right? Yeah. And what's interesting here is you're beginning to see the introduction of wood look or wood look elements in the framing of the windows and the entryways as a way of warming up the a less aggressive gray. Next image. This is sort of an in-between, right? It's not sort of warm gray and it's not the bright color, but they're beginning to use neutrals as a way of breaking those volumes up, right? They're using gray, they're using white, and they do have a little bit of the brown, but the brown here is a wood look element. So they're in the realm of the neutrals, but it's multi-chromal, all brick mostly. Next image. Again, we have a flat roof, but what's interesting about this series of images is that there are a couple of bricks that we would call them iron spot, and they're not glazed. They're just a tad more expensive than a regular brick, but they have a really interesting texture. It's almost like the clinker bricks of the old days. And one of the things that people have problems with modern building is that there's no texture to them, right? So with the next series of images, we're looking at a gray brick that's quite beautiful, and it begins to deinstitutionalize the building. But at the same time, that gray brick begins to be accented with the frames of the windows and its texture. And here you can see they used red windows. One of the first images we showed is a dark brown brick with yellow windows, the yellow window frame. On the left image, they're using wood look, not wood. We would never use wood in this project, but a wood look or a wood color for the frame itself, for the window frame. Next image. This is an interesting building. It's actually all brick. It's a relatively simple building with just a couple of insertion of texture. The brick, the way it's laid out, has a much aggressive texture at the entryway. And with just a couple of addition for sun shading, you see the one, sort of a sunshade element on the right and a sunshade element on the left, on the top windows. Those sunshade elements begin to be a warmer element that begins to give texture and interest to the project itself. But it's really a simple box. Next image. Next, you can, next image. And another project that begins to use that a more neutral color brick and with wood look elements. And now these images are not necessarily directly applicable here, but they show what we can do with CMU with a larger masonry unit up top. And then next image. And another project that uses CMU, which is a larger module, but introduces a texture, right? And for our promise, 901, we're done. So we would love to hear any comments you have, any thoughts that might sort of guide us in the sort of the early designs of the exterior of the building.
So one of the things that was brought up previously in terms of vision was that there should be some sort of historical reference. And I think that when you look at the local examples that you launched off from and the vocabulary that we have, you were really looking at contemporary school designs. I would say you should also take a peek at designs from Concord's past that use masonry. So things like the Umbrella Building, the local arts center, the Stowe Annex, the Emerson Annex, the Harvey Wheeler Center in West Concord. These all provide points of reference and design elements that could provide more of a historical context for the facade of the building, as well as material selection.
I guess there might be points that can be made that would be the opposite of that one, Matt. So I hear you. I think it's a good comment, but it's also nice for a community to go forward while retaining some of that historical context. I'm not sure about the Emerson Annex as being a beautiful piece of architecture. So not the annex, I'm sorry, the Emerson Building. The Emerson Annex is interesting, but I'm not sure the Emerson Umbrella Building is so interesting.
I think that one of the interesting things look at historical building is not necessarily the shapes or the figures in a sort of a stage set way. Those buildings, for instance, actually used arches, and the arches played a role. We don't build the arches anymore. Whatever arch we do is a kind of a bit of a stage set. What's interesting on looking at those buildings is the way they handled scale and texture. and they begin to break the masses of the building at a sort of a much more humane, human sort of approach. And we certainly will look at them for all these reasons. So the connectivity to the locale will be readable, but in a sort of a more contemporary approach.
Yeah, all those examples I gave were former schools as well, by the way.
So this is great. This is just so wonderful to be able to see all these images, and kind of boggles my mind as to how we can give input that can help guide your next steps. But I will say that they all look wonderful to me. And as I look at them, I kind of want to take the best we can do in the most efficient way and the most cost-effective way. So what would be helpful from your point of view?
Okay, so for instance, you know, there could be first of all, any comments that you want to send us via email would be appreciated. Even down to sort of I like and I don't like.
Yeah.
You know, that's okay. I mean, right? I mean, you know, we obviously, I assure you that by the time everybody kind of talked about this, everybody would dislike at least, every project would be disliked by one person, right? So we have to sort of get a consensus of what there's a group of people, a larger group of people that don't want something. We need to understand that. For instance, the issue of color. Would you be interested in the use of color or of a bright color in the school, right? It is for children, and not to say that children are always associated with bright color, but even adult buildings now, I mean, even adult programs have now color involved in them. So are we okay with using brick with some kind of a color complement? Or are we okay with using window frames with a color as a way of using an accent, right? That's a group. I mean, and to what extent? I mean, do we want to go to the extent of that school which used a lot of white with a lot of lighter color brick with bright colors? Or do we want it to be just a small accent in some locations? Or do we, you know, that's a question, right? Another question, are we okay with exploring non-red brick, right? You know, that's, and we would recommend that we should, and that's why we have this sort of a complement of colors. But, and even in the 18th century, in the 19th century, they used gray brick. They used to put tar on it. And you know, some of the faces of the brick would be a gray color. So some of these issues are really what we're interested. Are you interested in a more minimalist approach that relies on the landscape with very simple brick? Are you interested in texture? So any of these questions can be sort of a useful conversation.
Well, I'll just speak up that I love the idea of using something besides red brick, but I am one voice. I think that the sort of variegated, the colors that kind of meld into the landscape are just gorgeous, and picking up some of the, I can imagine picking up some of the colors of the landscape more in those sort of gray and off-white colors. So there's a bit of feedback for you.
I like your comments, Pat. My comments would be more at the goals level. I like what you had to say about, you know, basically breaking up the institutional characteristic or the institutional look and making it less institutional, you know, and not being stuck to some formula on windows, but doing the right thing with glass from a functional point of view. And I like the texture comments. I think having texture is key. I'm not so keen on the color thing, but maybe could be persuaded there. But I'd like a lot of these things that you showed us were quite inspirational. And I'm quite keen to, you know, in some ways, you know, project a new look that you know, kind of takes us forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. I know I would have a hard time. Yeah, go ahead, Peter. I want to hear from other people.
my comments are that yeah, this is great. I really appreciate you putting all these slides together. You know, this site to me is unique in a way that we have the different elevations and the forest there, unlike the other schools that we've done where it was really a cleared area, more or less. And so to incorporate some of that, the earth tones, and as Pat said, and as Charlie said, the texture, I think it could tie nicely into that whole kind of subtle look, but very, you know, sleek and modern without being overstated and gaudy. As far as the colors, I think that I wouldn't be a huge fan of lots of bright colors on the outside, but more on the inside spaces to keep it really bright, open, and airy. So those are my initial comments.
Sure. Thank you.
You also made some comments about windows and the coloring of the windows and the window frames and the way the windows are basically, or the window enclosures are created. I think that's another very good way to manage breaking up those spaces. And I like what you showed there.
Yeah, I mean, that offers a very subtle way of introducing color without it being overbearing.
Other thoughts from other committee members? I know sometimes it's hard to send an email with your comments, but hasn't, you know, do anyone have a gut reaction here to share?
Pat, I just think it's going to be a beautiful school. It's so fun to project forward and think what it's going to be, whatever decisions we make on color and all that. Yeah.
I just see myself driving down Old Marlboro and seeing this very spectacular, but very somewhat different building for Concord, kind of catching the earth tones.
Yeah, we want to be inspired.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Pat, can we, are we going to talk about some of these other issues or other points that were brought up in the communication from Dawn, those documents?
Kristen, help me with this.
So I think that if I could summarize just the visioning feedback that we got, it's so that then we can move on to new business, and then we can open up the floor for anything and then public comment. I think we're doing well with time there. So so I'm hearing that not a lot of color on the exterior, maybe a small accent or something like that, but there's not an overwhelming interest in a colorful exterior, right? I also heard that we're not necessarily wed to red brick. We're open to exploring other colors of brick, and that we're interested in tying into the landscape because we have this unique setting with the woods and a lot of nature at this site. So I also didn't hear any strong feelings about the window patterning or size, but that it should be more really functional in a sense, right? It should be responsive to budget, daylighting, and things like that. So if that captures adequately kind of what I heard, then we can go into new.
Kristen, I have one more comment. The auditorium wall that's going to be facing the road, more or less, even on an angle, I think that something interesting should be done there, so it's not a brick wall, because that's something that the community sees every day driving by.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's going to be a very interesting place where you have a very large monumental wall. At the same time, it's going to be very visible. It's actually the first thing you see when you're driving from that direction. So I think we have to work pretty hard on making that elegant, understated, yet, you know, not a monumental wall. Absolutely correct. By the way, also, if you can send us a list of those buildings that you mentioned that we should take a look at, that would be great.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to say that you need to create a Victorian, elements or anything. That there are material references, perhaps there, maybe individual design elements. They are part of our history, and we can look backwards at the same time as we look forwards.
Absolutely, that would be really interesting. So if you can send us a list of those buildings, and even better if you have photographs of them, we would definitely look at that.
And then Peter, oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, sorry, Kristen. No, I was just going to thank you for your summary, Kristen. I think that was a great summary they captured. I would just add to the list the idea of textured surfaces as well. And then just one technical note, before we get too far down the road with CMU, I mean, in my experience, I haven't seen great insulation details of the level we'd be looking for here with CMU. That it could be done, but I'm less familiar with that detail.
So I think that yeah, I mean, I think with the CMU we'll be looking at is a slightly different shape. It's 20 inch by 4 inch.
Okay.
The biggest problem with CMU is that sort of 18 by 16 module, which sends your memory right back to those high school walls.
Right.
So once you get rid of that module, it just becomes a beautiful masonry. And as I mentioned, the polished face CMU actually looks like terrazzo. So it's a completely different beast from what people are used. And I can show you images of that. We can show more images of that if we go that direction.
Well, just quickly, Saul. So then it's a gap, and then the insulation, and then sheathing.
Yeah.
More of that.
Matt, you said insulation, right? Not
Yeah.
It's the same as a brick masonry veneer.
It's still like a brick.
Yeah, it's a face brick, and it'll
outboard
be
insulation.
It's a face brick or face CMU.
Great, thank you.
Great. So Matt added the note about textured brick, and I think that'll be critical for some of those large wall areas that don't have a window or something like that. And then also I wanted to mention, I left off the color on the interior, that there is an interest in color on the interior for brightness and playfulness. So wrapping up.
Sure, we also said texture through window treatment and the way those are built out and the color associated with the window. That adds texture as well.
Charlie, you mean shading by window
no,
treatment?
I mean the way the window frames, the way they're framed out.
Yeah.
The way that's kind of architected is is a major feature, I think, of a building today anyway. Is that correct, Saul?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a configuration. It's a relationship of the windows to each other and the way they're framed that begins to kind of create the texture in a lot of these projects.
Good.
Okay, so then the only other, in terms of the documents that Dawn sent, I believe you're referencing, so she had sent the draft presentation, which we've just reviewed. She had sent the takeaways, which again were folded into the updates to the floor plan. So if there are any other questions on those, I would ask that people let us know. I'll ask right now, actually, we'll take a couple minutes. Were there any other questions about the takeaways document?
Was the teacher workroom mentioned in the takeaway document? I think it was.
Yes, it was. Yep.
So
we
don't need to discuss this now, but I would just say that I think these areas by floor are quite important, and I think that one of the functions that we can achieve by having a shared space that enables plug-in of all of this shared equipment, it makes it more possible to manage our plug loads, or should. And I think that having shared facilities that teachers can use rather than having their own ovens in their own, their own plug-in, I forget what the word is, microwaves in each classroom, you'd have one at the teacher workroom level. And the other question, I don't know whether we're open to discuss the size of the teacher workroom anymore, but you know, it just occurs that to me that given that we have you know, most of the classrooms are effectively owned by the teacher, and where they have planning time in the classroom, and that's part of what you call your utilization. They have no students in the classroom for, you know, 2.5 periods or so per day. It would seem that having another whole space that's for teachers to go do work together just seems a little odd to me. You know, given that this is all by team, and the teams are located in their areas, and they own the rooms, and the walls open up and so forth, do we really need to have that additional space in that dedicated to that teacher workroom, or could it be allocated to something else? I'm not sure to what extent it's going to be used. So
I'm going to remind us that we went through during the utilization process a very significant exercise in how those rooms are going to be used the other 3 periods of day. So we eliminated health rooms completely. We eliminated coding and other rooms completely, because those gen ed classrooms are going to be double and triple dutied for other curricula offerings. So the idea that the spaces are going to be without children multiple periods of day is not the way we've calculated it.
Okay.
And the idea that the teachers really need to be together, and Justin was very strong on that idea that, you know, if teachers aren't brought together in a single location, they may go for days, weeks, months without seeing other people in different grade levels. So being able to bring them together for socialization, for collaboration, for relaxation was a very critical component to teacher health.
Because I know they said they wanted to pull some of the space out of there and allocate it to the other floors, which, you know, made sense to me. So, you know, whatever you want to do with that, I guess we're kind of past discussion on this. So, you know, I'll close off my comments there. So I'm good with that.
Anything else before we move on to the next documents? Great. So one of the other documents distributed was just an update to the SD phase agendas. After everyone took a look at the whole spread of the meetings and the dates through the summer, we were made aware that the August 26th date was a conflict. So we're proposing to have that on the 27th. So that was one of the changes. That is moving it from a Thursday to a Friday instead. So hoping that with this amount of notice, that is feasible for everyone. And then we had a similar conflict with the November 11th holiday. And so we proposed a change to the Friday before November 11th, because that date becomes very critical with estimating. So November 11th was landing on a Thursday, which is when we would have otherwise had our cost review, but we need to keep that moving for a town meeting and so on. So we're actually proposing meeting the Friday before. So that was issued in that agenda update. And again, I think Declan has already been working on updating all of the dates, the calendar invites. So that's good. And then the only other change is no change to dates, but a change in order of agendas. So next meeting, we were going to review site on July 15th. So there'll be another more work with you, Cole, on the design and architecture, but we were going to also review site, and we've swapped that with MEP. So we're actually going to do MEP and sustainability on July 15th, and then move site to where MEP was. So just flip-flopping too. So those, again, I had noted those in red so that you wouldn't have to fish for the changes. And I believe the Hill team will update those calendar invites.
Thank you for doing that, Kristen.
Okay, so those were the documents that I had seen circulated. So we could move on to public comment if there are no other questions from the building committee members.
My one last little question is, are we going to have a process to talk about inserting this goal into our materials, our community facing materials, this goal of 100 million?
We can, so I think that the last vote from the committee was for the 108, and we've decreased the number to align with what we're projecting in terms of costs. The range still encompasses the 100 million. We can,
I think all we need to say is that it's our goal to throughout the schematic design process to keep our eye on 100 million and to do what we can to move the process toward that number. Now, when you get the final estimation done, that it's all going to change. But I think in the interim, we have what we have, and we have a goal and we have a requirement to kind of heal over to this $100 million number. So I just think you ought to somehow figure out a way to put that in there.
We can modify the goals slide to just say 100 million goal. I guess
that's good.
My one comment is that our goal is to lessen the cost, period. So I don't think that, stating a hard line of 100 million, I mean, if we could get it down to 98, we would. We're not going to stop, so.
Well, it's 100 million or less. I think that is what the intent of the three committees' comments were, 100 million or less. So I think you're right. We want to do 100 million, or if we get it to 98, you get it to 95, that's even better.
Right. So we'll note our current projection range, and then also the goal of the committee is to retain the original range.
Right.
Good.
That sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or new business that needs to be covered? Then I'll open this up for public comment. Dean, I see your hand up.
Hi, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace, member of the Finance Committee. Speaking for myself, I'm also the observer from the Finance Committee. I just want to commend Charlie for trying to bring the goal to 100 million. But one of the things that was a piece of the motion that the committee adopted was to look for efficiencies, look for opportunities. And I would just like to see as a regular part of the schematic design agenda on every meeting, a bullet point that says, what efficiencies have we discussed in this meeting? Where have we found or looked for opportunities in this meeting? So that it's a regular piece of the way the committee is doing what it's doing, is to look for those efficiencies, just to bring to the forefront the piece of the motion that this committee adopted. That's my comment. So thanks.
So I heard some of those efficiencies and opportunities discussed in this whole discussion, but it sounds like, Kristen, maybe just pulling it out as a bullet point might be something to consider, sort of to highlight it.
I think the best way to do it is probably to carry it in the next meeting, because it's a dialogue at first, where the architecture and design team members will be presenting the range of opportunities and also providing that feedback, Pat, that you noted. And so I think that what would probably be best is if in our next slide deck we say that these efficiencies were discussed and accepted in a way, because I'd hate for us to, if we name efficiencies, then that makes an assumption about decisions.
Okay, yeah, good point. Other public comment.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for that. One thing that I would just want to follow up with is efficiencies also might mean looking for opportunities within the space summary. There still are potentials for a space to be smaller, something to be reorganized. And I don't want us to just be looking for whether or not we're putting, some kind of concrete on the walls versus brick as a cost efficiency. I think that space efficiency gets us there faster and better. So just looking for opportunities where that's still possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
I would add to that. I would say that you can get a space efficiency without taking anything away from anybody. And I think that's a good way to look at it. I also want to avoid looking for efficiencies by, doing things that aren't going to be helpful from a materials point of view. I think if we can get some more efficiencies out of the space, we should definitely be looking for those. For example, the 2 feet extra in either direction on the basketball court that have been added to the dimension I provided, it costs $400,000 based on your numbers. So these are little things, but when you get 4 or 5 of them, they add up quickly.
Thank you, Charlie. Are there any other public comments, citizens' comments? I don't want anyone to get lost in this. Okay, so I think that we can adjourn if someone wants to move to adjourn this meeting, unless there are any other comments.
I so move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Charlie.
Second.
Thank you.
Might be speaking.
All right, so I'm gonna do a roll call. Jared?
Jared had to go, sorry.
Okay, Lori?
Yes.
John Harris?
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
Matt Root?
Yes.
Matt Johnson?
Yep.
Peter Fashalis?
Yes.
Court Booth?
I think Court hopped off too.
Court hopped off. Okay, Frank Cannon? I see you waving. Chris Popov?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Matt Johnson? Did I call Matt Root or Matt Johnson? Who did I call?
You called both of us and we both said yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, thank you very much. And I say yes. And so I declare this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cole.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Great.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
that was really good. That was great.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.